This is All Things Cooperatives, the podcast about the unique ways that cooperatives are addressing needs and community challenges. I'm your host, Deb Troca, Executive Director of the Indiana Cooperative Development Center. Hello, I'm Deb Troca, Executive Director of the Indiana Cooperative Development Center, and your host for today's All Things Cooperatives podcast. Today we'll be discussing Black-led farmer cooperatives. Farming as a family-owned and independent business has been an important part of the social and economic development of the United States. But for many Black farmers, it is more often than not a losing struggle. The end of slavery was followed by about 100 years of racial discrimination in the South that limited, although it did not entirely prevent, opportunities for Black farmers to acquire land. Enforcement of civil rights in the 1950s and 60s removed many overt discriminatory barriers, although by that time, increased technology had significantly reduced the demand for farmers and agricultural production. Nevertheless, cooperatives, while having some limited application in earlier decades, emerged as a significant force for Black farmers during the civil rights movement. They assumed a major role in marketing and purchasing and in improving opportunities for Black farmers to retain their ownership of land. They essentially helped keep alive a traditional aspiration for independent farming. Black communities have historically used cooperatives to survive. They have always known that the individual isn't possible without community. There is no me without we. So my guest today is Lauren McAllister with the People's Cooperative Market. And Lauren, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, everyone. This may not be the first time you've heard my voice, but it certainly won't be the last. My name is Lauren McAllister, and I am a Black farmer. I am in Indiana, southwest region of Indiana, and I am a rancher and farmer going on 12 years. I also participate with the People's Cooperative Market as one of the incorporators and have done so since our inception.
So you mentioned Southwest Indiana is where you're farming and ranching. Could you tell us a little bit about your community?
Absolutely. In 2023, the community health rankings of Monroe County, which is where my farm is, rated here, the food insecurity rate in Monroe County is 13%. And according to Feeding America, 16.8% of Monroe County residents are food insecure. This is above the national food insecurity rate of 12.5. Bloomington is the city that we operate most of our sales out of and where People's Cooperative Market is located on the east side. The population in Bloomington receiving assistance for food access is entirely concentrated in Monroe County. We have neighboring counties that absolutely support, but the majority of food access is addressed here. Financial burden is multifaceted, and we've noticed a lot that in our community, people do not have access to the adequate transportation in order to get to local food, nutritious food in a consistent and affordable way. Hoosiers are hungry for local food. There are plenty of CSAs, but unfortunately in Monroe County, only less than 1% is employed by farming. Farmers report financial benefits from the CSA model, but there's low participation by many consumers.
So it sounds like there are a couple of reasons for food insecurity, transportation being one of those, lack of access being another, and I'm going to guess there's an economic burden as well. So could you tell us a little bit about the People's Cooperative Market and why, as the group was forming, why the co-op model was used?
Oh, that's a great question. I was there. That's the answer. So in response to a farmer's market in the city of Bloomington, run by the city of Bloomington, there was a vendor there who was recruiting and upholding white supremacist ideas. And because the city does not work in a cooperative model, it works hierarchical, we wanted to do something alternative. We wanted to give an alternative way for farmers to work together. And so we were having meetings, everyone's talking, and I'm just sitting back like, okay, well, when are we going to do a co-op? Because that's the answer. And I had already been on the board of Blooming Foods and understood intricately the benefits of co-ops. I was reading a lot about how when you start a co-op, the longevity of your business is more successful. So small businesses, 2 to 3 years, but co-ops, 10 plus years. Just by creating a cooperative, you're able to be more successful over a longer period of time. We had many meetings about how do farmers work together in a system that isn't so capitalistic. And when we started to vote, I said, but that's what it is. If we're voting democratically about having an autonomous space with open voluntary involvement, I was like, we're doing a co-op. We can call it something else, but that is what we're doing. And so we went to the state and got the designation, and I started offering our farmers education specifically about why farmer-led, producer-led, vendor-led co-ops were so successful. I read the book about Weaver's Way, which just opens your eyes to success and failure, but really helped give me the legality and the formal understanding of why this was a practical application. And then secondarily, it was just easier, right, to hear from our farmers if they were able to vote directly. The idea that we'd be able to care for other co-ops, care for community, and really incorporate education was crucial because we were interested in creating a space that was intersectional, anti-racist, and moving us forward, evolving our community away from a hierarchical structure. This showed up intensely because at the time, there was really a lot of confusion and a lot of heightened emotions about what to do to solve this issue that was happening in our community. But when it came down to logistics, what we heard from farmers is that they don't have time to set up and stand at a farmer's market all day, hoping that consumers would purchase from them. So we created an online store and a weekly CSA. You can go to our website, peoplesmarketbtown.org, and sign up for a weekly CSA until midnight on Wednesday. Our farmers get their orders Thursday morning. They deliver Saturday morning. We aggregate for them. We set up what we call the shared table. So we literally share space. Their food touches each other, and they're able to go back to farming, which is what we wanted them to be doing, to be concentrating very clearly on regenerative, agricultural, soil health, but also just a much more beneficial work-life balance.
You indicated that education was important to get people kind of over that hump of what the heck is a co-op and why should we do that? So what did that process look like? Was it kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Did it take a while for people to really understand? Kind of talk us a little bit about how that process worked.
Again, I am persistent. So I thought it was extremely important that when farmers signed up with us, that they would actually go through some cooperative education. We created a Google Drive that had lots of resources around not only co-ops, but also anti-racism, intersectionality, gaps in care in terms of food security. And so the Google Drive was one way. We talked about it at meetings. But again, we were creating a market that was fostering conversation every single Saturday with our consumers, with our farmers about why we are not continuing a model of capitalism, why it matters that every single shopper who comes to us is not shopping at Kroger, and what difference that makes in the longevity of local food. I also think that farmers talking to other farmers, peer-to-peer education is much easier. So because I'm a farmer, I was able to bring cooperative education into many conversations in which maybe it wouldn't have been brought up. SARE was a really great partner in the sense that because I got a SARE grant, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research Education, I was able to meet an entirely new group of farmers and bring in this co-op model. And I went to the Small Farmers Conference that's hosted every year at Purdue Extension. And so that was also an opportunity for me to get more resources and more stories from other farmers to educate them directly about why this is an option. I'll lastly say that there were many people who were interested in co-ops but did not know that that's what they were doing. So they were voting with each other. Let's say that they did their CSA and they were doing produce, but their farmer friend was doing chicken. So they were already doing it, but just didn't have the language for it. And so the Google Drive with all the articles really helped give a framework for why they were already working together because it's financially beneficial. It reduces transportation, but also it makes us like hang out. It makes us build community. And so that care for community part was easy once people understood why they were doing it. Why would we do a co-op? Because the capitalistic model does not work in the long term, especially for small businesses, which is what farmers are.
So when as you're putting the co-op together, part of what you were attempting to do was to create a new market for farmers, right? But then secondarily, or maybe as equally as important, was to ensure accessibility or access to healthy food for the community. So can you talk a little bit about that part? And was that something that was a hard sell, or was that something that the rest of the potential members kind of bought into early on as well?
No, that's an excellent question. So we were thinking equitably about how to support farmers by paying them right in the CSA model. So they know they made sales by Thursday morning. They already know, okay, I've made this many sales. I don't have to guess. And then the access point was because what the city of Bloomington was doing by saying that they would not exclude or at least not educate a white supremacist vendor is that they weren't concerned about the safety of Black and brown consumers. And so we wanted to make it very clear that we are concerned about that and we want them to be included. Saturday morning is already an elitist day because it's usually a day off, or for our communities, we're serving brunch, we're in service industry jobs, so we are not shopping leisurely at the city market. So we did a few things. We decided that we would open People's Open Pantry, which is a zero barrier pantry in which we would bring some of our local food specifically for those who are interested in getting food support. But also we started our sponsored box program. So you can go to our website and purchase your weekly CSA for your family. And in the same transaction, you can sponsor a box of produce, meat, eggs. At the time, there was dairy and bread at the very beginning for another family. You can do that weekly or monthly, even now, with eggs, produce, and especially meat. What we found over time is that putting those two purchases together allowed our community to invest not only in their family, but in the larger family, which is our community. Ever since the beginning, we were interested in how we can eliminate barriers to local nutrient-dense food. And I think this was a great way to say, farmers, you don't have to just get 50% of your food paid for. We will pay you full price because we want you to give us the highest quality food for the most vulnerable populations. And it's clear that those vulnerable populations would benefit the most from the highest quality nutrient-dense food, which is why we had the Thursday order, Friday, right? And then Saturday aggregation, so that there was very little space between harvest and eaters. And more importantly, we deliver for free. So when we began, we had a ton of volunteers because it was at the very beginning of the pandemic. So driving and no contact was essential. We continued that service. And then we got a partnership with Project Dash, which is DoorDash. They actually paid us $1,000 grant so that we could employ their drivers to take local nutrient-dense food to our sponsor box community members. And so this year we were celebrating with them because they did over 1 million deliveries. We did about 300 in 2023. And so it was very exciting to see how there are actually other groups who are interested in eliminating the transportation barrier. We were eliminating the need to set up and be there all day and pay high fees by having a sliding scale. So farmers can set up with us, producers and vendors, between $5 and $30 a week. And that market fee is your membership fee.
Okay, that was a question that I had. So your membership fee is very low. So it's removing that barrier to participation in the co-op by making sure that that fee is accessible to most, if not all, farmers.
Yeah, and farmers who are just getting started, right? So emerging farmers, gardeners, people who just have access. Great, come set up with us. Are you the best eggplant grower in the neighborhood? Prove it. Bring it to our market and we'll pay us $5 and you can sell your excess, which I think is a real demonstrative point, right? If we have more people growing food, harvesting it and sharing it in our community, we all benefit from that because less money is going to Kroger, less money is going into capitalism, and specifically for People's Market, less money is going toward white supremacist institutions.
So you have the CSA box program, but you also have a market, if you will, for consumers to come and buy produce and meats and whatever else your members have. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we have prepared food, we have the produce, we have artisans. But what I enjoy the most is when folks can come who cannot afford anything. And because someone has sponsored a box, we allow them to shop for whatever produce they want, however much that they need. And there is zero expectation. You know how people want to tell you a story? We don't need the story. We believe you. Take as much as you need because our community is able to give us the money, we pay the farmers, and then we eliminate all barriers for folks who are hungry. We believe that you're hungry. We don't need any evidence of that.
And do you feel like because of that trust that you have in the community members, that the community members don't abuse that trust?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's already a lot of stigma about asking for help, let alone food support. I'm reading this book called Feeding the Other, and it's really explaining to me that religious-based organization food banks are given this sense of altruism, like we're doing hungry, poor people a favor, when in fact, there's a surplus of food. We're talking about perishable items. Please eat this food. I'm begging you. Farmers don't want to work this hard for it to be thrown to the pigs, right? We want all of the nutrient-dense food to be consumed so that it is appreciated, because the payments that farmers get will never equate, right? It's never going to be enough. What it takes to grow lettuces really well, years of knowledge. What it takes to cultivate pounds and pounds of food regularly, store them well, and bring them to you, innumerable. So the most honorable thing to do is to make sure that our farmers are sold out every single week, that they go home with nothing. And then those consumers who come to pay, they're able to pay above that sliding scale. So sometimes people will come, we'll have a table of heirloom organic tomatoes, which everyone loves in Monroe County, I got to tell you. And I'll say to them, okay, tomatoes, that bunch or that box of tomatoes is $3 to $5, but you are welcome to invest above that number in our food system. And anything that people pay above that $5 is held by the co-op so that we can then pay for the sponsored boxes for folks who have nothing to contribute. But they're still contributing because they're eating perishable items, right? So we're trying to expand the definition of who's participating in the food system and give dignity to everybody, eaters, producers, consumers, not just those with money.
So do you think with what you are doing in your community, have you seen or felt a difference in the community and its members and their understanding of the whole food system and what the farmer has to go through to raise that food, and then the fact that there are hungry Hoosiers that they're willing to help support? Are you seeing kind of a shift in the way people view that?
I think it's twofold. So I think that we're seeing a shift in judgment, right? We're seeing less judgment that people are hungry, partly because it's inflation. So we're all experiencing a food crunch in that sense. We're like, things are getting more expensive. I also think that when people are all offered an alternative model, it makes them more curious about what they're doing in the food system. So even if they don't just shop with us, let's say they shop with us a few times, and then instead of going to Kroger, they go to the Tuesday market, right? They get more curious. Are there any Black farmers? That's a question that people often ask me. Are there any Black farmers? Well, I'm right here. So we exist. But also there are tons of emerging farmers, Indigenous farmers, Latinx farmers, queer farmers, really young farmers that we find more curiosity about. And I really enjoy the idea that an experience at People's Market kind of dismantling what we think farmers markets must be in order to succeed And so what I'm seeing more often is that when people visit us, and sometimes they just stumble in, and I explain why you would invest more, what difference does it make to the farmer to have a weekly CSA order so they don't have to worry. They are very curious why they haven't done it before. They're like, why didn't I? And then they understand, oh, maybe I'm too late in the season to sign up for a 8 to 10 week CSA, but at People's Market, I can do 1 week, take a week off, do another week. So again, we're just bringing down any accessibility issues by offering it weekly, online, delivery. And I think at the heart of your question is there more empathy in our food system? And I would say yes. Definitely.
So currently, about how many members do you have in the co-op?
Like producers, farmers, and vendors, about 22. But we are expanding. So we're thinking about including donors and investors because, drum roll, we have a greenhouse. We have a 30 by 90 greenhouse. And so we're thinking about having plots sponsored by donors, sponsored by institutions that we would grow food. And then people would come pick it. So it'd be like a you pick farmers market. So we're trying to work out how those members would be able to vote and be an equitable voice in the way that the producers and the farmers work. I'm really interested in how our farmers market model, our growing model, our farmer producer centered model compares to a consumer co-op, and making sure that we aren't creating barriers for consumers to be members, but making sure that we're prioritizing and centering Black, Indigenous, and producers of color.
So in that greenhouse, you talked about plots. So who would those growers be? Are those going to be your current members? Are they going to be new consumer members?
That's what we're working out. Because secretly, I'm trying to convince consumers to be producers, right? I'm trying to walk them down this food path from, well, I garden a little bit. Well, come garden at the greenhouse. Well, do you have extra? Great. Sell it at the farmer's market inside. Oh, wait, you're a producer now.
So this is a kind of a different kind of question, but how has your health department reacted to the market? Are you getting support from? Are they a hindrance?
They are doing their best to tolerate our demands. Let me put it like that. So before we existed, there was only one farmer's market. So they had a forum for one farmer's market. They had onboarding for one farmer's market. They were only interested in dealing with one farmer's market. And so we demanded that they evolve so that farmers don't have to pay for $100 for multiple locations. First of all, we were like, that's wildly unfair. Then we were pushing really hard about, can this be online? Right? The paperwork and the parking downtown, which now I have to pay for, right? These are all barriers to producers because then they're like, well, I don't want to set up a farmer's market because I have to fill out this paperwork and pay $100 and all of those things for an emerging gardener farmer is a deterrence. And the health department does want to do a good job of keeping people safe. Let me say that. That is their job. And People's Market already has liability insurance. Farmers have their own insurance. A ton of our farmers and producers have gone through the produce safety. So we encourage both sides, right? We're like, we're doing our part, you do your part. But the paperwork it's a lot to have to submit it every single year when we have the same vendors and they're doing the same.
You have to do it yearly, correct?
Yeah. Actually, we have to do it every market season, but I just do it all at once because we're a year-round market. So some markets run April to October, I think. Some just winter, but since we're 52 weeks out of the year, we have more paperwork, right? So that's it's the deterrence they don't see because they're like, well, just do one or the other. And it's like, but our people are hungry every week. We have to maneuver. And that's what I mean about demand. It's like we were really demanding them to do more, right? We want to evolve our food system. They can't just be one farmer's market. There can be multiple farmers markets, and farmers and producers should not be penalized for wanting to maximize farmers markets wherever they are, how often they are, every single week.
The capitalist, it sounds like there was not a ton of capitalization needed to create and launch the farmers market. But after the initial launch, you said that you purchase food from the farmers. Okay. So how do you how do you capitalize that? How are you funding that purchase of food of whatever type from your members when your member fees are probably not anywhere close to covering that
Yeah,
expense?
nowhere near. Nowhere near at all. So when we think about the food portion, right, we also have artisan vendors. And so their fees help. People can donate. So you can go to our website and you can just donate money. There were lots of donations that were going on early on, to be frank, because people got the stimulus check from Trump and they're like, awkward. And so they were like, how do I get rid of this money? But also, we have a fiscal agent. We've always had a fiscal agent. So some folks are attracted because they can literally donate to us and get that tax letter every year. And then I began grant writing. There was tons of opportunities for grant writing early on, and no one else was able to do it. And it's something that I do. And so I started writing grants locally to see if there was investment. There are a few orgs that really showed up for us. Farm Aid is one of them. Bloomington Community Foundation. No, it's the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County. And so those partners, along with other partners, started building relationships and saying, hey, have you heard what People's Market's doing? Have you heard the work that they're doing? Do you know why it matters? And like I said, when consumers come and they find out that if they pay $7 for that tomato, right, as opposed to the $3 that it costs us, that $4 means we have an extra tomato and $1. So I think that consumer education also really fostered a sponsoring of the boxes in real time.
Do you provide, as a cooperative, education, not specifically about the co-op itself, but about farming practices, particularly as you're trying to grow, no pun intended, new farmers and new growers?
Yeah, that's actually my favorite part. So when we had produce safety come down this year, we brought farmers from across the state actually to learn about what does it mean to do your produce safety? What does it take to be GAP certified? I actually did a Indiana Black Expo Black business training. It was 10 weeks that I was going up to Indy and learning about EIN. What does it mean to be an LLC versus a sole proprietorship versus finding a partnership? I found out a lot about 501c12s and 501c5s and what it means to be an agriculture cooperative. Also, if you buy enough stuff, the people at Lowe's are like, aren't you a farmer? Aren't you tax exempt? And they start giving you this form where they're like, fill out this form. And so sometimes it's just going through the process, figuring out, oh, there's actually expenses that we as producers aren't maximizing on. So then I started communicating that with my other producers and saying, hey, did you know that? Hey, if you call Good Earth and get 20 yards, I'll do 10, right? So those kinds of communications were happening. But specifically, Purdue Extension and SARE were great partners that I was able to tap into. When I did the SARE grant that I was awarded, a farmer rancher grant, research grant, I didn't realize how much open source information was even available. So it was easy for me to disseminate information because it's open source, have an article that tells you how to prune your blueberries, have an article about mushroom cultivation, have an article about prairie cover crop, and then utilize that. And one I really enjoy is by Soulfire Farm. And they talk about specifically in their SARE report, how to incorporate multi-level involvement in a CSA. Can people grow and take home food? Can they pay and grow? Can they just pay? Right? Creating many entry points into a growing industry or growing process.
So if there was another community that approached you about, hey, we want to start something similar in our community, what advice would you give them?
First of all, you need to reach out to Indiana Cooperative Development Center because this is not something that's everywhere, right? What I discovered is that there aren't a lot of cooperative development centers that offer so many resources. It's been a pleasure to work with you, Deb. It's been awesome to even have the Indiana Farmers Market community of practice, to see the different ways in which it's an umbrella experience. But specifically, join the National Black Food and Justice Alliance meetings. They have monthly meetings. They are very informative. They absolutely give you skills and exercises that can help formulate what it means to start a co-op, similar to, if not exactly like, People's Cooperative Market. We aren't actually interested in having people's markets everywhere. We want those communities to be self-determined and make their own choices about what kind of alternative market in the cooperative model that they want to produce. I would say attend the up-and-coming Co-op Black-Led Day. It's an excellent opportunity to meet other Black-led co-ops and have much more deep dive conversation about the history of co-ops. Obviously, read Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Nimhard. It's a great overall historical summary of how Black-led cooperative and Black-led food sovereignty projects have persisted despite white supremacist institutions and individualized white supremacist violence. We often quote Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. It provides a re-indigenized version of the way that we can view food systems and our participation in them. I'd say start a learning circle. Take these books, meet every once in a while, talk about them, and then determine how those principles can show up in your farmer's market. Attend the Black Urban Growers Symposium. It's a conference. This year it's happening in Texas, I believe in November. One of the things that I really appreciate is attending a workshop about consent with Open Circle. It's an incredible organization that gives you lots of ideas about range of tolerance so that when you're building your co-op, you understand what is outside of your tolerance range and what is within the mission, values, and goals of the co-op. We have very clear mission, values, and goals. We talk about them constantly. They're on our website. When people ask us, why do you do that? We just kind of Vanna White it. We're like, this is why. We go back to it over and over again because it gives us a compass in what we're doing. And then lastly, I would say Google Dr. Valerie Grimm. She gives a great overview of the making of Black wealth in the United States. So you can understand that this is a cyclical relationship. There'll be highs and lows, and there's a way that co-ops are the continued and sustainable method in which Black-led groups, food sovereignty projects can persist.
Thank you. That was very, very well said. I appreciate that. You have given us a lot to think about. One last question. How long has the co-op been in existence?
Since 2020.
Okay. So that's not a very long time span. It's only 4 years. I mean, you started up obviously during COVID, but can you start to see in your community the local food system, kind of the breaks in it the system starting to coalesce and come together? And are you seeing people finding out that there is this source available and that perhaps there is some decrease in the lack of access that I know you can't completely, we would love to completely eradicate, but are you seeing those numbers go down just anecdotally of people who are hungry in your community?
I wish my answer was yes, but it's no. Unfortunately, it's no. So the families that we support, so every week we have regular families. And over the 4 years, we've actually consistently provided weekly food support to some of the families. I mean, there's just frequent flyers. We know the people, we know where they live. We've always been supporting them. We have partner organizations. Middle Way House is one of them. When we had People's Open Pantry, New Hope was one of them. So I can say those communities have, right? Because I've seen the food. I'm aggregating it and putting it out. But to be totally transparent, we get more requests for sponsor boxes than we can fill. And that has only increased. And I think in part because of state legislation around SNAP. And I think in part because of larger, wider white supremacist institutions, not because the farmers aren't growing enough food, right? I don't think that's true. Land loss is also a factor. As things get more expensive, less farmers want to, or are able to, quite frankly, expand their businesses. I think that there's been more awareness made of local food systems. That I can say has been an increase. More people are talking about them. More people are looking for them. Even in our own Google search engine, a lot more people are Googling farmers markets in Bloomington and Monroe County. But what I would like to see is more institutional involvement. And so one of the things that if you want an indicator from me, would be that the city of Bloomington has a status on local food commission, right? That the county has a commission that is specifically talking about how much local food are we producing, who's it going to, how often, and how can we get more of it? And I think those would give the indicators of success or if we still have room to grow. I would really appreciate if the city of Bloomington made an initiative in which they would dollar for dollar match local food. Okay, just go on this journey with me, Deb. Just hold on. So the city would say, hey, restaurant, if you buy local food, we will match you dollar for dollar, so that our institutions and our small businesses were working together like a co-op to ensure that local food was a persistent option for anyone in the community.
Lofty goals. Thank you so much. Gotta have them, right?
Gotta have them.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We appreciate your time today and learning more about People's Cooperative Market.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me join, and I'm happy to talk again.
You've been listening to All Things Cooperatives, the podcast about the unique ways that cooperatives are addressing needs and community challenges. This podcast is copyrighted 2024 by the Indiana Cooperative Development Center, which retains all rights to the content. The podcast was produced by Lee Llewellyn at FOS Studios in Carmel, Indiana. Theme music was written and performed